In today's episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Academy, Cain goes up against his roommate Drew for a student project. Cain sets a monster and then passes his turn. On Drew's turn, he normal summons Avant-Garde Phil, a 1400 attack monster, and attacks into the set monster, which is revealed to be Rhinoceros. Drew takes 600 life points and ends his turn. Cain normal summons Attribeasts Volkit and then equips it with Shock Collar. You equip it to a beast monster and it gains 300 attack and defense, so Volkitten goes up to 1500. Volkitten attacks into Phil and destroys it, dealing 100 damage to Drew. However, Avant-Garde Phil's effect activates in the graveyard. If this card is destroyed, both players can special summon one monster from their hand. Then, regardless if either player does, target one card on your opponent's side of the field and destroy it. Drew special summons Avant-Garde Brush, which has 1700 attack, while Cain special summons Attribeasts Ankotter in defense position with 1200 defense. Then, Drew targets Rhinoceros to destroy it, but Ankotter's effect activates. Once per turn, if an Attribeast monster were to be targeted by an attack or a card effect, you can destroy one card in your hand. This card gains 400 defense instead. Cain destroys a card in his hand and Ankotter goes to 1600 defense. Cain ends his turn. Drew adds Monster Reincarnation, discarding Avant-Garde Filter to add Phil back to his hand, and then the effect of Avant-Garde Brush activates. If a monster is sent to the graveyard, note its attribute. Add a counter of the same attribute to this card, so Brush gains a wind counter. Drew normal summons Avant-Garde Phil, then enters the battle phase, declaring an attack with Brush onto Volkitten. However, Ankotter's effect activates again, destroying a card in Cain's hand to negate the attack and increase its defense to 2000. Drew attacks into Volkitten with Phil, causing a self-destruct. Through Phil's effect, Drew special summons Avant-Garde Smock in defense position, then targets Ankotter and destroys it. Cain has no cards in hand, so not only does Drew get the upper hand on Phil's summoning effect, but Ankotter can no longer protect the destruction. Because Phil and Ankotter were sent to the graveyard, Brush Effects activates, gaining 2 water counters. Then, Drew activates Brush's effect, still in the battle phase. You can tribute this card with 2 or more different attributes. Quick effect. Special summon one Avant-Garde fusion monster whose fusion materials contain those attributes. This is treated as a fusion summon. So with a water and a wind counter, Drew fusion summons Avant-Garde Panorama in attack position. Drew activates the effect of Avant-Garde Filter from the graveyard. You can banish this card from your graveyard, place one counter of any attribute on a monster on the field, and if you do, it gains 300 attack. Drew adds a light counter to Panorama. Panorama attacks Rhinoceros, destroying it. Then, because it can attack twice per turn, it declares an attack onto Volkitten, which is now at 1900 attack due to its own effect. However, the effect of Shock Collar activates. If the equipped monster is selected as an attack target, you can make the attacking monster gain the following effect for this battle only. If this card battles a monster, destroy it before applying damage calculation. Also, take 500 damage. Volkitten is destroyed by the briefly acquired effect of Panorama, dealing 500 damage to Drew. Then, the effect of Volkitten activates. Once per turn, if this card is destroyed by a special summon monster, you can special summon this card. Thus, Volkitten is special summoned in attack position. During the end phase, Avant-Garde Smock's effect activates. During each player's end phase, send the top card of your opponent's deck to the graveyard, then apply the following effect depending on the card type. Cain sends Polymerization to the graveyard, thus all monsters that Drew controls gain 200 attack and defense. On Cain's turn, he activates Pot of Greed to draw 2 cards. Then, he normal summons Attribeasts Watdog in attack position and activates the normal spell Mortal Decline. All monsters your opponent controls lose 300 attack and defense. He enters the battle phase and Watdog attacks into Smock, destroying it, which activates Watdog's effect. If this card destroys a monster by battle, add Polymerization from anywhere to your hand. During the main phase 2, Cain activates the newly acquired Polymerization and fuses Watdog with Volkitten to make Attribeasts Diffusion Byakuks in attack position. Watdog's effect activates from the graveyard. If this card is sent to the graveyard, except by battle, you can add one Attribeast monster from your graveyard to your hand. Thus, Cain adds Volkitten back to his hand and ends his turn. Drew declares an attack onto Byakuks, but Byakuk's effect activates. During either player's battle phase, you can banish 3 monsters from the graveyards. Quick effect. If this card were to battle a monster of a different attribute than the banished monsters this turn, this card gains attack equal to the difference in both players' life points during damage step only. The monsters that are banished are Avant-Garde Brush, Avant-Garde Smock, and Attribeasts Watdog. Drew, in response, activates the effect of Fusion Modification from his hand. Target 1 fusion monster you control. Destroy it. Then, fusion summon 1 monster from your extra deck of a different attribute. If your opponent controls a fusion monster, you can treat this card as a quick play spell. Drew combos this with the effect of Avant-Garde Panorama. If a card effect targets 1 monster on the field, you can make that effect target all monsters on the field instead. So, Drew is threatening to destroy Attribeasts Diakos with the effect of Fusion Modification. However, Cain activates the effect of Attribeast Rhinoceros from the graveyard. Once per turn, if an Attribeast fusion monster you control were to be destroyed while this card is in the graveyard, you can send the top card of your deck to the graveyard. If the sent card is the same card type as the card that is attempting to destroy the fusion monster, aka monster, spell, or trap, then the monster is no longer destroyed. Also, special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. Cain sends Negate Attack to the graveyard, which doesn't meet the requirement, so Diakos is destroyed. Panorama is destroyed as well, and Drew Fusion summons Avant-Garde Contrast in attack position, as it is a different attribute than Panorama's Water and Wind attribute. Then, Contrast's effect activates. When this card is summoned, you can banish as many monsters of the same attribute from the graveyards. This card gains 200 attack for each monster banished by this effect. Also, this card becomes unaffected by the effects of monsters of that attribute. He banishes Avant-Garde Phil and Attribeast Encoder, and thus Contrast becomes a 2700 attack monster. Then, Diakos effect activates in the same chain. If this card is removed from the field, special summon 1 banished monster to either side of the field. Thus, Cain special summons Watdog in defense position. Contrast attacks into Watdog and destroys it. Then, Drew sets a card and ends his turn. Cain sets a monster as well as another face down and ends his turn. Come Drew's turn, he normal summons Avant-Garde Canvas and then activates its effect. When this card is summoned, you can make your opponent send 1 monster from their deck to the graveyard, and if you do, you can target 1 Avant-Garde monster on the field, except Avant-Garde Canvas. Force the activation of its effect, so long as it can be activated while on the field. Drew targets Contrast, and Cain sends 1 monster from his deck to the graveyard, and then Contrast activates its effect. You can banish as many monsters of the same attribute from the graveyards. This card gains 200 attack for each monster banished by this effect. Also, this card becomes unaffected by the effects of monsters of that attribute. He banishes Attribeast Watdog and Attribeast Diffusion Diakos, and thus Contrast gains 400 attack. Drew enters his battle phase, commanding Canvas to attack into the set monster. He knows it's Vulcan, as it was added to Cain's hand due to the Watdog's effect on a previous turn, and Cain has no cards in his hand. And that's where we'll end today's episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Academy. I'll see you guys next time.